Well, joining us now, Robert Jenrick, Secretary of State for Communities, Barry Gardiner, Shadow Secretary of State for International Trade, Ian Blackford, the SNP leader in Westminster, and Antoinette Sandbach, the independent, formerly Tory MP. Welcome to you all. Robert, if I can start with you. We hear, at least from number 10, it is in the tunnel now, this deal. What sense do you get of how it's going? Have you been told?
Well, of course, the Cabinet spoke yesterday afternoon. I'm not going to go into the finer details of the negotiation, but it does seem as if a great deal of progress has been made. If you remember back just a couple of days, there were many who thought that the Prime Minister was not serious about negotiating a deal. Actually, he's straining every sinew to get this deal done. He had an extremely successful meeting with Leo Varadkar in the Wirral last week, and now we're working very intensively to see if we can get a deal done. Of course, there is a great deal more to be done in the coming days, and I don't want to overestimate the chance of a deal, but we are certainly doing everything we can to secure one.
And you think that this deal, you heard what the Finnish PM said earlier, there is no time in a practical, legal way to find an agreement before the EU Council meeting. You're confident that this is a deal that could get the country out by the end of October?
I am. The EU is capable of moving extremely quickly if they wish to. Like any negotiation with the EU, and in fact with any major negotiation in life, everything happens at the last minute. We're the first country to leave the European Union. This was always going to be both complicated and to come down to the final hours and days. So this doesn't surprise me. No. We're going to work round the clock to try to secure it.
So Philip Lambert said, of course, it's incredibly easy. If you want to leave, they could do a deal tomorrow, but it would have to be one of the deals that had already been through the EU27, that was on the table, off the shelf, if you like. This one isn't. He doesn't see how a dual customs union can work with Northern Ireland because he thinks it means nothing at all. So I'm just putting, if you like, his words back to you.
I heard his words, but with great respect to him, we're now in an intensive negotiation with the EU. Clearly, progress has been made. You've seen that from the public statements we've heard from a number of the key players, not least from Leo Varadkar, who was saying something quite different just a couple of days ago.
So you're optimistic. You think you're nearly there. If you're not quite there by the 31st, it would seem ridiculous not to ask for a bit of extra time, wouldn't it, a technical extension?
Well, we don't want to do that. And in fact, the Prime Minister has no intention of doing that. And a deadline...
So he won't? No intention means he won't extend?
I think the Prime Minister has been as clear as he possibly could be, as you know.
Just checking with you.
We do not want to extend, and we're not going to do that. And a hard deadline is a good thing in a negotiation. You know, before I went into politics, I worked in business and as a lawyer.
Sure.
And everyone knows in difficult negotiations, you need a deadline to work to.
Right, you've got a deadline. You've also got 48 hours until that runs out. You're saying if there isn't something, if the EU hasn't come back within 48 hours, then you're still going to stand by the 31st of October, even if you think there is light?
Absolutely. We want to leave on the 31st of October. We're going to keep negotiating as hard as we possibly can. I hope we can secure a good deal.
You've got 48 hours. You've got 48 hours until
within
the
the next couple of days. But look, there's a decision here. If members of Parliament, particularly the opposition, want to throw away the progress that we're making, want to cast that aside and jeopardise us securing a good deal by playing parliamentary games in the course of the next few days, such as this Saturday sitting, if there is one, that I think would be a huge shame. And I don't think the public would forgive them. We've waited 3.5 years for this moment.
Let me look at
a deal
parliamentary
maybe in
games
sight.
then.
Let's get it done.
So you are expecting to table a budget in a week in which we could be out on a no-deal Brexit. Is that right? You'll still have a
No, that's
budget?
not what... No, the Chancellor...
No, because you just said there'll be a budget on November
I didn't say
the
that.
6th.
I didn't say that. The
Your government
Chancellor
has
said that we intend to have a budget on November the 6th. But he was also very clear that if we left without a deal, we would take a period of time to understand the impact that it had on the economy and bring forward a budget slightly later on. So I'm afraid you're misquoting him there.
Fine, OK, I apologise for that. So in the event of no deal, you will be cancelling the budget. Good to know.
No, we haven't said we're cancelling the budget. Those are your words. We've said that we will assess the impact of no deal on the economy, which is the responsible thing for a government to do, and then bring forward a budget at a slightly later date, such as a couple of weeks later.
So the budget plan for that Wednesday would not go ahead, presumably, within
that 3 days? Well, it would be delayed, not cancelled.
OK. So there is also a chance that Parliament might not be sitting on a Saturday?
Well, that's a decision that the Leader of the House and the Prime Minister will have to take in the coming days. I can't give you any inside information to that. and it may well depend on the progress of the negotiations. And that's, I think, perfectly understandable.
You're presumably not that worried by the idea of a second referendum or a confirmatory vote, are you?
Well, I'm very worried by the idea. I adamantly oppose it. I think we've had a referendum. It was an extremely important democratic event in the life of this country, and we want to get on and implement it. I don't see any benefit in having a second referendum.
Your Prime Minister can deny the money resolution. You know, for anything like this, the money has to come from central government. So if you really don't want it, you just kill it outright. You say, no, we're not going to give it a money resolution.
I think it's extremely... I can't see a circumstance where we would want to support a second referendum.
That's not the same thing. Why don't you kill it with a money resolution?
Well, you're asking me, would we provide a money resolution to enable a referendum to go ahead?
You can just say, straight out, you can say it here on Newsnight tonight, we will be denying a money resolution, i.e. the funds
the final
for a second referendum.
The final decision will have to be taken by others, but I cannot believe that we would provide a money resolution and allow a referendum to go forward, because this will simply cause delay, uncertainty, damage to the economy, division within the country and damage to our democracy. And the practicalities of this referendum, are another thing. The House of Commons could vote, I hope they don't, but they could vote for a motion to have a second referendum, but then you've got to say, what is the question? What is the franchise? What is the date? Can we get enough time out of the EU to do that? None of that makes sense to me. If we can secure a deal, let's do it. MPs across the House should come together and support us.
Let's go to Barry Gardiner. Thank you very much indeed. Just let's clarify this then. Are you going to deny the PM a Saturday sitting? Was that discussed at all in shadow cabinet?
Look, we don't know what a Saturday sitting is going to hold. We haven't seen anything that the Prime Minister...
But you know if you can refuse it.
Come back with. Robert said that they would assess, if we did crash out without a deal, they would take time to assess and postpone the budget. But actually, this government's already assessed it. We know what their assessment was. It was that there would be a 10% reduction in GDP if we went out onto no deal, and if we went out on to a deal that was something like what is being talked about, it would be a 6.7% reduction
Barry,
in
nice
GDP.
try. Did you discuss whether you would be sitting on Saturday?
Well, of course we discussed whether we'd be sitting on Saturday.
So you might not, is that right?
But no, sorry, I didn't tell you what we discussed, except that we discussed it. And I don't talk about what goes on in shadow cabinet.
Will we expect Labour to be there on Saturday? That's all I'm asking.
Absolutely. If Parliament's sitting on Saturday, the last thing we want to be doing is watching it on television. We want to be there participating in the debate.
So that will go ahead, providing the Prime Minister pushes it forward. We hear that a group of MPs, cross-party, will be bringing this bill to advocate a confirmatory vote on any deal. Is that something that Labour will back?
We want, ultimately, for the public to decide the outcome here. And, of course, we want that to be in the way that we've put forward. We want it to be a credible option to leave, which is what we want to be able to negotiate if we're in government, against a Remain option. But we want it to be credible. Now, in the scenario that's being painted here, it would be, as far as we've heard, a deal that is not credible, a deal that is going to knock 6.7% off our gross domestic product as a nation by the government's own figures.
OK.
That would not be credible. And so if they come back with a deal that looks like that, that's not something that we could support. But if it were to pass through the House of Commons, the only way that we could see it doing that is if it went to the people.
And you would
ultimately, they have to decide this issue.
I'm reminding you that this was a ball that you started rolling. September the 24th was a Barry Gardiner missile, wasn't it? There should be a referendum.
I just answer your question.
OK, fine. You said, yes, indeed, there is a logic to holding a referendum to get the issue of Brexit done and dusted. That was your response to should there be a referendum before an election. And we know now there are splits. And I'm asking you very directly. This is what you said. This was a quote.
Yes, but you've taken away the context of that quote. I remember it very well. Yeah. It was at the Labour Party conference. But the context of that quote was, if we were in a situation where there was a vote of no confidence and then a caretaker government. That's a very different situation.
So what you're saying then is you would still prefer to put the election... We're muddled, because Rebecca Long-Bailey said yesterday that she'd been on a journey and her understanding now was that it would be OK to have a referendum before an election. Now, you flip back. We know that John McDonnell's on one side, he wants a referendum first. Jeremy Corbyn's on the other. So just tell us where you're sitting. I mean, there might be a perfectly logical explanation, which is that you're doing a feasibility study to find out which is more popular.
The perfectly logical explanation is this. Ultimately, we are not the government. The government has had 3.5 years to conclude a deal. Robert talked about the importance of a final deadline. In fact, this is the third final deadline. We've had the extensions already. So they've had 3.5 years. They've failed. We don't have a majority to dictate what happens.
No, but you can call it a no-confidence vote.
What we have to do is we have to respond to what the government brings back, and we will do it by talking to Ian, by talking to people, former independents who are former Conservatives.
You could bring a no-confidence vote. You know he's about to.
The point is this. We need to bring a no-confidence vote when we know that we can win it and carry forward a programme. That's the important thing.
In Blackford, you're going to bring a no-confidence vote, or you want to bring a no-confidence vote, and they're not going to be with you. Is that the end of the Remain alliance?
Well, Emily, there's a harsh reality. As things stand at the moment, the government wants to take us out of the European Union on the 31st of October. We're talking about just over 2 weeks. I am, quite frankly, petrified as to what a no-deal Brexit would mean. And quite frankly, what Boris Johnson seems to be talking about, because we haven't had the detail, is also going to be economically calamitous for us. We can't sit back and allow this to happen. Now, the opposition parties have come together. We've passed through the Ben Bill, became the Ben Act. It gives a clear instruction, as a matter of law, to the Prime Minister that we're not leaving on the 31st of October on the absence of a deal. But we can't trust
Robert Jenrick
we can't trust this Prime Minister.
That we will.
Absolutely. So we've got a Prime Minister that seems to be suggesting he's prepared to break the law. You know, we had a Queen's speech today, and it was all about law and order. Yet you've got a Prime Minister that won't give a straight answer as to whether or not he will support the law.
Nodding along to what you're saying,
so
but
therefore,
you're calling for an election that he can't sign up to.
I'd simply say to colleagues, if we want to stop this dangerous Prime Minister, we have a responsibility. The alliance that was there, come together. Let's have a motion of no confidence. Let's make sure that we deliver the letter. We get the extension,
and Labour stop nodding now.
And then we all have to take. Then we all have to take our responsibilities.
I hear what you're saying.
We will take on the Brexiteers in Scotland.
Who are you talking to? Because they're not with you at the moment.
Well, there is a sense of frustration. Well, in the end of the day, if we do end up crashing out at the 31st of October because we haven't taken Boris Johnson out of office, then I'm afraid some people are going to have some hard questions that they're going to have to answer. We'll accept our responsibilities. We want a motion of no confidence. We want to take Boris Johnson out of office. We want that election. We want to put ourselves in front of the people of Scotland. Everyone else has got to take their responsibility. And would you vote for a second referendum?
Well,
we need to have an election first. If there's to be a referendum, that's going to take some months.
If this is tabled for Saturday or for the following Thursday, you're a no.
Well, so let's just think about this, though, Emily. No, we're prepared to look at any options. But realistically, if you're looking at a referendum, because the government said that it won't support a money resolution, so the question is, how are you going to do it? The only way you can conceivably do that is to have a government of national unity that probably has to be in place for a number of months and has to pass a budget. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. Yes, let's have a referendum, but let's have an election first.
There's no consensus.
An election is the way of doing this.
All right.
Let's remove the Brexiteers and then we can get to a position of safety.
I'm going to go to Antoinette Sandbach. You have heard from Tory, Labour, SNP. Tories want a deal. Labour wants a second referendum. The SNP wants a vote of no confidence. You and your grouping will be kingmakers. Tell us which of these options you can support.
Well, I want to see first what the Prime Minister comes back with. I'm not going to make a judgment on a deal. I don't know the detail on.
So you could support a deal outright. If it's the right deal, you could say, yep, I'm back in the Tory wing now and let's go.
Whether or not I get the whip back isn't up to me.
You could offer by voting.
I've made it very clear that I will be supporting an amendment about a confirmatory referendum. I too think it has to go back to the people. I believe that there has been a change of attitude in the UK. They've seen that all these views here are perfectly valid. Each view is valid. Each member of Parliament sitting here has been elected by the people that they represent. What they also see is that there isn't an agreement, and if there's an election, there's likely to be a hung Parliament. And I think ultimately that puts us back into a position where there has to be a deal that goes before the British public, and the decision has to be made again by the public. And I would argue that there is a deal that could get through on the 31st of October. Prime Minister May negotiated a deal. It has been agreed by the European...
So you're in the Steve Kinnock camp, which is basically bring back what we had, even though it might not have been voted for last time round.
With the concessions that have been negotiated
with Labour.
And if the Prime Minister wants to leave by the 31st, he could get agreement to that deal with a confirmatory referendum attached.
Let me get a sense of your affection right now for the Conservative Party. If there was a vote of no confidence, you wouldn't presumably bring down Boris Johnson, would you?
Well, let me make clear that I'm facing my own vote of no confidence in my association tomorrow. And I think the Conservative Party needs to recognise that it's a broad church. Absolutely. And that it has to accept that people like Ken Clarke, who've been Conservatives for years, should be part of the party. So I would say that the party, the Conservative Party, has always had a broad range of views on Europe. And it's quite important because that reflection of views is reflected across the country.
Will you be
what I will not be doing is voting to put Mr Corbyn into power. That is absolute. I cannot think of a situation. Can you vote for the Queen's speech? Well, I want to see how the debates pan out. I want to see what deal comes forward on Saturday or potentially after Saturday. Okay. But I'm not making any commitments at this stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in. Thanks.